here in the perimeter, there are no stars. Out here, we is stoned, immaculate.
Hello and welcome. This is the C86 show. I'm David Eastaugh. As you know, we love a special guest. This week it's going to be the turn of the Popinjays because I recently spoke to Wendy Robinson from the band to find out more about life, love, poetry and all that other groovy stuff. So you're going to find out all about the early years, the band years and post-band years and what they're up to now. So after several minutes of interesting but casual chat, we get down to the exciting subject that was the early formative years. Wendy, it's over to you.
I remember kind of not really paying that much attention to music when I was much younger. I mean, my family would be kind of, I'd say it was in the background. There was no kind of, you know, when people talk, I was always felt a bit envious when people said, oh, I grew up with a musical family and, you know, my dad was playing jazz and my mum was playing. There was definitely none of that going on for me. It very much came as part of that sort of 14, 15-year-old where you're kind of desperate to be different to your family. You're making that sort of like separation. And I guess it was just as sort of punk was kind of, you know, happening. And I somehow kind of heard about it. Maybe, no, I have older brothers and sisters, but they certainly weren't into music particularly. But somehow I kind of came to be in my bedroom at night with a transistor radio, trying to find something that didn't sound like the music that my family and parents were listening to. And I can remember coming across, it was actually a Madness single, Madness, when they were probably the first single they ever released, and it was being played on John Peel.
Right, my God, you were
So
there.
I heard that, and then I was kind of, this sounds different. This doesn't sound like, you know, old people's music. And then just started to listen to John Peel. And then, you know, became aware, because I was in the north of England, not that much going on there in the town I lived in, but then started to hear about bands names, went to see a local band, then got friends with other people who were going to see bands. Friend who thankfully had a car and he would drive us to Manchester, Leeds, Sheffield, Nottingham, all in, you know, driving distance, and started to kind of just really get into music that way. So it feels a bit accidental, but I was definitely searching for something that felt like it was me and not my family.
No. Did you used to sort of do Top of the Pops on a Thursday and the chart show on a Sunday afternoon, evening? Were you following the charts during your formative years, though?
Yeah, I was, but I think that's where I would look at it and hear it maybe and think, this music thing's a good idea, but this doesn't feel quite right. So I think I'm the youngest of 12. So I think from a very early on point, felt myself kind of not wanting to be in that gang.
Yes.
You know, my sister seemed to kind of marry and you know, at the same time as well, I was you know, learning about things at school, kind of politics, and I don't know, becoming aware, I think.
Yes, my God. I was the youngest.
Music didn't, you know, the top of the pop stuff. I never was one of those people that was like recording things. No, I was just searching, I think, for quite a while until I hit upon John Peel.
Well, yes, God, you did well there, actually. But one of 12, that is an amazing... Because I'm the youngest of one of three, and there was a bit of an age gap between those two and then me. I think they wanted a girl, so never mind. They ended
My
up
first
with me.
record, actually, I think, well, I was into, like, the Bay City Rollers, you know, so when I was a real, like, 10, 11, and I remember having a poster of Jimmy Osmond on my wall.
Classic.
But that was kind of bought for me. It wasn't something that I'd asked for. But no, Bay City Rollers were my first kind of like what it means to be a kind of fan.
Yes, because over the last couple of years, people have written their little books about their childhood, and there's been a couple which I've been fascinated by, living in communities and stuff like that, and that childhood of, yes, sort of parents and different other adults around, and then gangs of children and everyone being a bit feral during these kind of community times. So they've been quite interesting. Was your kind of family life, was that a bit like, were you quite a gang, you know, having 12 of you and parents?
Yeah, I mean, I guess there was maybe a 4 or 5 year period when all of us lived at home. But then gradually everybody kind of like left to get married, and, you know, being the youngest, every year there would be somebody getting married, leaving. Then you'd start to have them have children and bring, so I've got a niece who is, she's only 3 years younger than me.
Right.
And when I was little, I remember one of my earliest memories. So she'd come to play. I remember once saying to my mum, "Who is the lady that comes with Karen? Who's Karen's mum?" And my mum said, "It's your sister, Susan." And I remember being totally confused. Like, she's a grown lady with her own little girl that I play with. How is that my sister? So it was a kind of a, yeah, there were always lots of people coming around for tea on Sunday, all of those kind of things, which I loved. But we weren't, I think it was more traditional. Our parents, had met at the end of Second World War. So it was more of a traditional, mum stayed at home, dad went out to work. As everybody grew up, they kind of got married and left home and all of that. And I was quite fortunate, I think, being the youngest. I got to see all of that. And for
Yes.
whatever reason, I felt very much inside myself, that's not for me. This is not where my story gonna start. Yeah.
No, and there was no pressure. Like parents sometimes going, "My God, who's going to have some children?" There's only, as for a small family. Sometimes I've met people who suddenly felt like, I
Yeah.
got this guilt trip, and it's like, well,
No, well, by the time I was growing up, my mum had done it so many times before. She just didn't. And actually, I think she was a bit exhausted with the whole process. So I got away with a few things. So when one time went to kind of like when there was when mods and rockers kind of re-emerged, there was
yes,
kind of bank holiday thing happening, and I would have been about 14 maybe, and I hung out with some older people from town, and they were all going to Scarborough, and I didn't even have to persuade my mum. I said, "Oh, can I go to Scarborough with some friends?" And she went, "Oh, okay." And I just went, and even then it was all over the papers, and I remember ringing her just to let her know it was okay, and she said, "Oh, have you seen in the papers all that trouble? I hope you're nowhere near it." And I was like, "Last night, Mum, I was chased by policemen on horseback."
yes. Well, that's just
Didn't tell her
very.
those things though, but she was quite relaxed. So I think I benefited from that because she was what I would say about my mum would be like benign neglect. And what I mean by that is she didn't encourage me or put pressure on me to go any particular way, but she didn't discourage me either. So if I said, "Oh, Mum, I want to do this," or "I feel like doing that," she'd be like, "Okay, love. Okay. That sounds good."
Yes. And was your dad? What was he like? What was
Yeah,
he?
my dad was always, I think, poor guy, had to work, all the hours to sort of provide for us all. He had his own business. He was a builder. He built the house I grew up in, actually. But then unfortunately went bankrupt when I was 13. So the house I'd grown up in that he'd built, with his own bare hands, basically, he lost that. So that was quite a formative kind of experience for me, I think, because I'd never, it's like the real world came crashing in,
Yes.
and I had no idea that such things could happen, really. So my dad was kind of in the background, always working, and then that happened, which changed things quite a lot. And then he became quite quickly sort of unwell, had like heart attacks and things. So he actually died when I was 24. So yeah, he wasn't. I wouldn't say he was somebody that I had a solid relationship with, unlike my mum.
Yeah, my God, that is rather drastic, isn't it? Yes, I know. This is, looking back on parents, because, yes, mum was always at home working with the twin tub, washing machine,
Yes,
which was
yes, I
always very
remember that. The
the,
twin tub, it was such a big thing for them, wasn't it? It was like freedom,
it
just
was,
having one thing and putting it in the other bit, and then
oh God.
yeah.
And these kind of tubes going from taps to,
Yes,
and boiling water being on
I
the
know.
on the cooker and things vibrating across
Gosh,
the kitchen. And I think as part of our enjoyment and things to do, we'd sit on it and just kind of
yeah, yeah.
shake a lot. And that was kind of almost a cheap day out really for us, actually watching, this experience and tongs pulling out these kind of washing, going from one thing to another. It's kind of ensconced in my memory. But again,
Yeah,
all I can remember was parents working. Dad would be sort of always having to have extra jobs to make ends meet.
yeah,
And if we wanted a holiday or Christmas, he would definitely have to get an extra job to get some money to then for us to go to Pontins or Butlins.
right,
And,
yeah. I
it was
think I
that
was
kind of
quite
gig.
lucky in that way. My family always, my older siblings used to say, "Oh, you're spoiled. You had the best childhood," because actually, from when I was about 6 to 12. my dad was doing really well. He was a builder. He had a company with a build. It was kind of a, I don't know, pretty good time financially. So we did used to have holidays, but it was only to like Skegness or the Norfolk Broads or something like that. But then it all came crashing down in the kind of early 80s, late 70s crash, I suppose it was. I didn't realise that at the time, only understood that as I've looked back. So it felt like I had a lot of, I didn't have a sense of our family struggling. But then it all changed when I was 13 and we lost the house, moved into a council house, which for a 13-year-old, when you kind of like, I don't know, always comparing yourself to others. I remember feeling so ashamed that had happened. And I used to get off the school bus like a stop early so that nobody knew where I lived. And it was like, yeah, I feel sad. I feel sad for the person I was then. And I probably wasn't a very nice teenager to my parents. But then at the same time, if things had gone on as they were, maybe I wouldn't have been driven to kind of leave home, move to London,
Yes.
myself to another lifestyle.
Yes. God, I can't remember. There was a film I remember watching when I was very young about somebody who, would go out with some, I don't know, there was a scene which really painted that, where they would say, oh, I live here. And they go, oh, okay. And then they would get out and then they would sort of run around the corner to a council house to sort of, because they didn't want their boyfriend to know where they actually were living. And it was like, oh, God, I wish I remember that film. But that just flashed to my mind when you mentioned it. So when you got to 1980, which was... Thatcher got in 79, 1980. We were 16 then. Hurrah! Well, vaguely. Did you do CSEs or O levels at that stage?
I did CSEs, yes, and O levels, and unfortunately, and not with any kind of massive. I mean, I enjoyed school. I think I liked the structure, so although, home was very sort of loose and lots of people coming and going and all of that kind of thing. And I'd always been interested in kind of reading and what was going on in the world and all of that kind of thing. So I really enjoyed school. So then got enough, I remember going to collect my O-level results, and the head of sixth form coming up to me. And so they must have seen the results already. And he said to me, have you looked at your results yet? And I said, yeah. And he said, look, you've done really well. You've got to come back to do your A-levels. And it was like, I know the first time anybody had taken a really strong line with me.
Yes.
So my mum, when I decided what O-levels I wanted to do, she was very like, okay, whatever you want, drama and, a few other things. I think I did O-level typing as well. I was in the back of my mind, northern working class. I always had an idea. You've got to be able to earn a living, Wendy. You're going to have to be able to earn a living. So learn typing or something like that. But so I decided then, and I went home and said to my parents, I've done really well, and they're really saying I should go back and do my A-levels. And my mum said, oh, well, love, if you think that's the right thing to do. So there's no pressure to kind of like get a job or anything.
Yes.
Then my dad said, what's the point of that? You're only going to get married and have kids anyway. And actually, he didn't say it in to have this impact on me, but the impact it had on me was, right then, that's absolutely what I'm not going to be doing. So somehow him saying it on the same day that, school had been saying, you're bright, you need to, make more of that. And so, I stayed on and did my A-levels. And I would say one of my A-levels I did was sociology. And I genuinely would say that was the turning point in my life. Learning that the family and politics and feminism, these were social structures. It wasn't how things had to be. It's how things were organised. And I remember when Thatcher got in, first of all, before knowing anything else, thinking, wow, a woman prime minister.
Yes.
But then I was a socialist, I would say, brought up to be one. And then pretty quickly after doing A-level sociology and then getting into music, it all kind of combined to make me kind of quite determined to do things differently.
Yes, well, quite. Blimey, that's quite a lot, isn't it, really? Because, yes, the early 80s was suddenly, we were at that age where suddenly there was the Falkland crisis, there the miners' crisis, there was Greenham Common, and it was all getting rather tricky at that stage during that
People protested, though, didn't they? People, if they didn't like something, they got out on the streets. I mean, I don't know where we stand with all of that now, really, but it felt like, I think what I took from all of those things was that even if you were not powerful financially, you had power as a person. You could make choices. You could, vote with your feet, vote with,
Yeah.
all of those kind of things. So, yeah, it was a good time, I think, for me to realise that, yeah, you can make a difference. You don't have to just
Yes.
follow the path that's been set out for you.
And also there was those kind of Reclaim the Night marches as well, weren't there, during that sort of early 80s period, which I remember, well, all through the 80s, I think, and Rock Against Racism. So when you got to sort of your A levels and you got them, did you then go on to university at this stage?
No, so as was coming along, and I think I struggled for a bit of kind of low self-esteem at the time. I think I didn't necessarily expect to get the good O levels. I didn't really expect to get my A levels, even though I was studying for them. And at the same time, I almost felt like I had two parallel lives. I had two separate groups of friends. One were my friends that I went into town with, that went to see all the gigs with. They'd often have totally different jobs. One be an engineer, one would be working in a shop. What we did with our kind of like education and part didn't come into it at all. We were just going to see bands, and that mattered more than anything else. Then I had my school friends, and that was very much like, which university are you going? What are you going to study? All of this. And it was coming to the point where you have to decide. And
Yes.
I just literally could not. I wasn't sure that university was right. If it was, what topic, what subject, don't know. Music meant more to me than anything else. So I just cooked up a plan that I would, for a year, go to live in London. How could I do that in a way that I could afford, be a nanny, have my, somewhere to live, get to go and see all the bands I wanted to see. And then probably I'll decide from there what I want to do, which university to go to, all of that.
Yes.
That was my plan.
The classic year off. That's always a good idea. That's a very good. So what was your first gig that you went to? What was the first kind of, or couple of gigs that you went to? Was it in Manchester or was it
No,
Leeds?
in Huddersfield. So Huddersfield's where I'm from. I saw Madness and the Selector.
Oh, nice.
And the Selector. I think they were probably the first. And then I saw a few kind of like punk bands. I actually saw Adam and the Ants when they were with a Z.
Right.
So there were a few things like that. So yeah, those were my first gigs, and they were all in Huddersfield. And then there was also a local band called the Kilometers, and they were a kind of like mod group. And I went to see them, and then they sometimes played in London, and they'd organise coach trips. So we'd go down for the day, and I'd be like, "Oh, it's London. This is where I belong." And I really remember going to West Hampstead, which was where they were playing in a pub there, and after the gig, before we got back on the coach, me holding the coach up because I had to run down into the tube station at midnight. Because I wanted to say, I've been in the tube station at midnight.
Excellent. Well,
I absolutely loved the Jam. The Jam were my absolute favourite band. And when the lyrics, everything about the Jam were just totally, I was obsessed.
Yes, well, it's easily done, really, wasn't it, at that stage? So then, so 82, 83 then, you were in London as a nanny, sort of getting to see even more bands. So then, how does that then develop in the next few years?
Yeah, so my best friend from Huddersfield, Joanne, she hadn't moved down when I had, but when I was kind of definitely clearly not coming back, and was always kind of writing to her, telling her what I was doing and where I was going and all of that. And I found it quite lonely when I first got there, but I was determined. I made myself go to things. I mean, I think about it now. I think, gosh, 18 and moved to London on my own, didn't know a single soul, wow.
Yes, quite.
Yeah, the naivety of youth, possibly. Anyway, Joanne then decided she would come down as well, and then we got a bed sit together, and then we decided we'd kind of talked about being in a band, but never really got round to very much, and we decided that maybe that's what we should do, that we should try and be in a band together. So we bought music papers, looked in the ads, put a couple of ads in ourselves, met with a few different people. One of them was eventually Polly.
Blimey, that is so amazing. So that's how it all started. That sort of, wow, that's just such a classic story, isn't it? That does happen. So had you ever thought of being in a band when you were a little bit younger, rather than just being a fan and going to as many gigs as possible?
Yeah, it was the only thing. I think I thought about being an actress, maybe. I thought about being a social worker, and then I thought about being in a band. I think actually the band seemed like the slightly easier option, as in Punk had said, I didn't play an instrument that well. Punk sort of said, you can do it. You don't have to be brilliant at it. You just can do it. So originally, Joanne was on guitar and I played keyboards, and I wasn't planning on being a singer at all.
Yes.
That wasn't my plan. Although I'd sung a lot at school, and I'd been told I had a good voice, but I hadn't really thought about being that. And then when Joanne and I kind of got in a band with a couple of other people, there was someone who could play much better keyboards than me. So I said, well, I'll sing then for a bit until we find a singer. And then that just became, okay, I'm the singer. And
Right. And did you start writing lyrics and sort of looking to see how
yeah,
you...
well, I had always written, so I'd written what I would call poetry,
Yes.
from a very young age. I've even still got the folder of that I used to write in when I was like 12 or 13. And yeah, so I'd always written poems. So then that was not far jump then to think about writing lyrics.
Blimey, that's so cool. That's cool. And during that time, you mentioned there was a two-tone movement, then there was goth, and there was new Paisley, there was indie pop that started in, for me, sort of with the Smiths for 5 years. Were you consuming all these sort of bands that were happening at the time? You were...
Yeah. And I moved through from punk to mod to new romantic to goth. So it was in the kind of goth thing that I started being in a band. And we even, when Joanne and I were trying to get into bands with people, we met up with Julianne, who was not in All About Eve at that point. She was getting a band together with Manuela from Ex-Mal Deutschland. We were all crimped hair, all of that kind of thing. And so very, very much into all of those bands, yeah. Let's think about it. Dance Society, Sisters of Mercy.
Yes.
All that kind of stuff. Bauhaus, absolutely loved it. Yeah.
God, you went to the dark side so quickly, didn't you?
Yeah. And when I met Polly, that was the kind of, when we first got together, we were kind of more influenced by those bands and the Cocteau Twins. We were just, Polly and I, first of all, it was me and Polly and a reel-to-reel tape recorder. That's what we had. And we fancied ourselves as a bit on the kind of gothy side. But actually, when it came right down to it, when we actually just played what came naturally, that wasn't the direction we went in eventually.
No. Were you inspired at all by, I don't know, bands that were coming along like Everything But the Girl or the Voice of the Beehive, or a bit later there was the Darling Buds and the Primitives? Did they sort of come on your radar? Did indie pop start to excite you at all?
Yeah, for sure. But we were never, I don't know, we kind of felt a little bit... Often music felt like a bit of a boys' club. And Polly and I were kind of like, staunch feminists. We weren't really. We were just a bit like, well, why can't we do it? We can do it. And then once we'd started the Popinjays and started to do a few gigs, one of the gigs that we had been offered was a place called the Bull and Gate in Kentish Town.
Oh, yes.
And we went along, met the guy, John Beast, who was running it, did a couple of gigs, actually. Only on our second gig there, in 1986, maybe 7, don't know. Anyway, there was a record label that offered us to do a EP, which ended up being the first EP. But also what came out of that was John Beast, the guy that ran the Bull and Gate, decided that he didn't want to carry on running the club. So he just kind of went off, and the owners of the pub and the club asked Polly and I if we'd take it on. So we ended up being kind of booking the bands, being on the door, which gave us great access to lots of kind of journalists and other bands. And so we put a lot of those early bands on in the Bull and Gate. I wouldn't say we were particularly inspired by them, I suppose, in being like females in music, but we weren't particularly aspiring to be, I don't know, indie pop at that point. We just seemed to kind of evolve into that rather than it being a plan.
Right, because I've got a few books. Look at that, I'm almost pointing from that kind of the Mick Mercer kind of...
Oh, yeah, the pop club, yeah.
Quite a few of them, and I can't quite remember, but they are probably there somewhere there. Yeah. So you were there sort of on that zeitgeist of
Yeah.
of indie pop. Had you, when you got to London though, had you sort of gone to things like the Living Room, the Alan McGee little club that lasted a very short period of time, or
No.
any of those other sort of the George Roby, or had you
Yeah.
sort of started getting into those little venues?
Yeah, well, I think when Polly and I decided that we were going to be in a band, and we had three things we wanted to achieve. One was that we wanted a single of the week in one of the papers. We wanted to play Jump Heel session, and we wanted to play a gig at the Marquee. It was like somehow kind of. And then Polly and I always kind of like made a decision like that and then worked our way backwards. It was a bit like, okay, so we want to get a gig. We probably have to get a gig before we can get a record deal. And we'd probably have to, we have to do a demo. We need to get a demo. Then we need to try and get some gigs. So we became kind of, just avid. The Bible was sounds, enemy, melody maker, looking in where are bands playing that we like, that we enjoy, and then sending tapes to them and then getting to play there. So it was always that kind of thing. I think once we were running the Bull and Gate, that's when we had a real community of bands who were, it was just great. You go there, we were really fortunate in that way, because it's kind of like a social life just erupted around us by the sheer fact that we were running the pop club.
Yes, because there was an amazing book that came out, I think this year or last year. Oh, he was Joe from the Faith Healers.
Oh yeah,
who'd sort of brought out one. He'd taken a lot of photographs of that time, and obviously, like, wow, at the time no one's going to be interested, but then decades later it's like, oh my God, you must put a book out with all these fantastic photographs. So the Bull and Gate was your place.
Yeah, I mean, we named it the Pop Club for the years that we did it. Had these huge kind of more than life-size guitars hung around in the place, and yeah, it was a real creative time, and it was great listening to lots of bands and being able to give them gigs, because we remembered how we'd found it when we were trying to get gigs.
Yes.
And then once we got record deal, we were able to kind of run the club as well as be free to go on tours and stuff, do all of our own stuff. So yeah, it was just we're really fortunate in that.
God, that is really fortunate, because that was one of the things I've noticed doing this show, is that yes, how many bands there are, but it was quite fortunate in the sense that good old Thatcher and the unemployment system, or job seekers allowance, or the enterprise allowance
the enterprise allowance scheme, we went on that twice.
There you go. You managed to get £1,000 in your bank account. How did that happen? I know. Magic that one up. And then you went self-employed for a year, got your housing benefit, council tax, and bingo. It was
exactly that.
Just, oh yes, rock star. Oh, that'll be fine. Thank you very much.
Yeah. I think we went as the Popinjay Foundation, which was we were promoting, that's what we called it. We didn't say we were in a band. And then when we that one had to come to an end, we were saying that we were T-shirt promotion or something like that, and we did Polly used to make loads of T-shirts by hand with like a screen printer. She made the Carter the Unstoppable Sex Machine's first T-shirts, and we kind of gave, when we were running the Bull and Gate, I think we gave PJ Harvey a first gig in London. Polly still holds on to a letter that we got from her mother. Polly Harvey's mother sent the tape in to the Bull and Gate saying, my daughter is very talented, please consider her for a spot in your place. And we even put Blur on at the Bull and Gate before they were called Blur, when they were called Stanley, I think.
Right. My God. So that was, what a time. Yeah, because there was some great things. There was obviously people could get this kind of strange sort of grant, I suppose. But then there were the music papers, which were great beacons. There was a John Peel show, which was a great beacon. And every town and city would have an alternative indie night, wouldn't they? So people could get their little transit van, and off they went around the country. And imagine that, an 18, 20 something, being able to sort of live that lifestyle. Thinking, how glamorous is this at 3 in the morning, 4 in the morning, unloaded in the middle of winter? Who doesn't want to?
Well, for doing that in your 20s, I think, once we got signed to One Little Indian, and then we went on our first tour with UK tour with the Kitchens of Distinction. Not that our music was particularly similar, but we had similar ethos, I think, of kind of like, we got on really well when we just got chucked in a van anyway and go to the UK. And I remember just being so blown away by the sheer joy of it, just being driven somewhere, turning up, doing a gig, having a laugh, next day doing it again, and being that was your life. That was you were being paid for it, you were making records, selling records. It just felt like yeah, a dream, an absolute dream can come true. Even though, Popinjays were only very small scale in many respects, we still got to do all of the things that we'd hoped we would do, but never imagined we could.
Yeah, and also, I mean, no one would be able to relate to the fact that when you were a bit of a lefty in the 80s, getting a job seemed completely like, how does that work? No one, career or ambition just wasn't on the radar at all. It was just like, it was happy hour down the pub and just kind of getting through life, wasn't it, really? There was not much ambition really on the left.
No,
If,
well, I think that's where my politics were on the left, but I was never, I had a very determined sense of my life is going to be, I'm not going to be sitting about. Life isn't going to pass me by. I think I had a very strong sense of that, whatever I did was going to be on purpose.
Yes, good ethos. So then your first single, was this on Big Cat Records
Yes,
then?
yeah.
So this is the one. This was a sort of 6-track EP, wasn't it, really?
Well, it was three tracks, the same 3 tracks on both sides. We did it. We always had a little kind of quirky way of thinking about things. So we said, play one side and save the other for best.
Excellent. There you go. And where did you record it?
That was in somewhere in North London. I think it was called Middleton Studios or something. I think it was a studio that had, been in existence for a long time, but not for that kind of music. And the guy that ran Big Cat was called Abo, who was from UK Decay.
Oh, God, I've
band.
interviewed him.
Yeah. He's married now to Keris Matthews, I believe.
That's right. Yeah. She shut the door. She was like, could hear, and she came in, shut the door.
Oh,
I was like, oh, that's Keris.
Yeah. Well, he saw us playing at the Bull and Gate, and it was incredible, actually. It was a very interesting thing because my dad had died the previous week and we had the gig booked. My dad's funeral was on the Friday and the gig was on the Saturday, and everybody was saying to me, look, you can't do the gig. And I was like, no, I'll go to Yorkshire, go to the funeral, then, I'm coming back, I'm doing the gig. And thank goodness it did, because that's the night that Abo saw us and offered us the EP.
God, that is brilliant. Yeah, God, his amazing life after UK Decay, wasn't it? I mean, he's done so many things. Wow.
Interesting man. Lovely man, actually. Really nice.
Yes,
really
charming.
Took a chance on us because we were a bit bizarre. We looked odd. Polly and I at that point didn't really have a kind of, we were a bit overhang of goth, and sort of with our reel-to-reel tape recorder. But I think I remember something of, I don't think it was a Mick Mercer review from that night, but there was something, and I really remember thinking, oh yeah, we've got something here, because it said nobody else sounds like this. And unfortunately, we were in a time where actually being unusual or different or looking like you were kind of trying to do something unusual was celebrated. And that the night we did that gig, we'd actually set up the stage like a white picket fence. Always playing, Polly and I were always playing with this idea of kind of rebelling against, female, girls, women, marriage, keeping home, all of that. So we'd set up the stage to kind of look like that, and then we'd come on with our kind of doing whatever we're doing. So yeah, and I think, we never just turned up on stage expecting that to be enough. We tried to be sort of like interesting to look at as well as listen to.
Yeah, and there was quite a lot of interesting, quirky bands on the indie scene, which had a real, thing, didn't they? There was like people like the Frank Chickens that came along, and there was, you mentioned the Copto Twins, but there was, there was also those scratchy bands like Stump and Big Flame, who obviously weren't looking for longevity in their career, but there was that Red Wedge movement as well. So there was lots of angsty poets around at the same time. So I think that thing about being different was definitely going to be on John Peel's radar. And, being an indie kid, you always quite found it fascinating when somebody came along and you heard this sort of the beginning of, I don't know, I love the Frank Chickens. I thought they were great. But yes, it was a good time to be a bit sort of different, really. So then did you get the John Peel session quite soon after the Big Cat recording?
Yes, so it was kind of more or less at the same sort of time. We were recording the EP, And that was due to come out. And then Polly and I always had a real DIY approach to, it wasn't like we were signed to a major and they were going to do all the promotion. We decided, we'd make sure people knew about us before even the review came out. And with John Peel, we sent a tape of the EP, but we bought this like huge, like maybe this size, like 3 foot tall plastic doll, and stuck the tape to the mouth, put it inside a big plastic bag, stuck the tape to the mouth, and then filled the bag with sweets. And we sent that to John Peel. So I would imagine that, caught his attention.
Yes.
And then the EP came out. We got a single of the week in the Melody Maker. And I think that was then, and to my shame, John Peel called to offer us the session. And I thought it was somebody just taking the piss. I thought it was somebody pretending. And so I because of how distinctive his voice was. And I just sort of said, oh, this is really not funny. Fuck off. And put the phone down. And that could have been the end of it. And then John Waters.
Yes, I know. I'm just thinking the same now. Walter.
One was the filmmaker, one was the producer.
Yes, that's right.
The John Peel, who also thankfully had a very striking voice.
That's right.
And he phoned, and I answered again, and it was like, and I thought, nobody I know is clever enough to do 2 voices.
Yes.
So then I was like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. And he was going, it's okay. Lots of people do that. Lots of people don't believe that John Peel will actually phone you and offer you a session. I was like, oh, thank you for ringing back.
Yes. There must have been so many people who did that. It's strange, isn't it, to think that somebody like that just would phone you, have the time in the day to sort of go, yes, I'll just phone a few people and see if they're about. And the landline, as well. Not everyone had answer machines. There must have been
No, at that point, we progressed onto an answer machine when we lived in our own kind of... At that point, we were living in a bedsits, and the phone was in the hall. It was one of those push the beep, 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 one of those phones. So if someone was calling you, obviously, you didn't have to pay. But, yeah.
Yes. Well, it was often, I remember there was, classic moments where people just having to go to phone boxes at a certain time, just waiting for the call and thinking, God, that was rather primitive. And also hoping that no one was going to be in the phone box at the same time. That could have missed their chance of fame. So what was your John Peel session like? Because you had the famous Dale Griffin, didn't you?
We did.
So the Mott the Hoople chap, was he all right with the band? Because most people went, he was a bit grumpy. Was he all right?
He wasn't... I wouldn't say he was friendly particularly. And actually, so the studio that normally was being recorded in for John Peel sessions wasn't available. They were doing some refurb. So we had to go to the Golders Green BBC Theatre and record in there. So actually, we were in this huge kind of almost like, I don't know, theatre space that they'd kind of, he was behind this big window, came out every now and again. But it was... it felt a little bit dangerous in terms of we'd never kind of been under that sort of pressure. If you're recording in a studio, you can make mistakes, you can do, and we had to kind of get on with it really. But on another level, I think we just also we thought, my God, this can't really be happening. Are we really doing a Peel session? And then on the other hand, it was all a bit kind of like, why wouldn't we be doing a Peel session?
Yes, this is all part of the master plan, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly,
really? This is what happens in that period. Yes, and that obviously brings you into a huge new audience, really, doesn't it, the Peel? Because I used to always record it on my trusty TDK D90 cassette and have to listen to, the show quite a few times because it was all sort of new music. So it was really it was just like... bombardment of different sounds, from the Bundu Boys to Public Enemy to Extreme Noise Terror. So it was quite tricky, but you persevere and sort of eventually sort of work out which tracks you particularly liked and which bands. So from that, was that when One Little Indian sort of you came on their radar? Yeah,
so I think because following the first EP, we did gigs, we got some really good reviews, we got, as I say, single of the week. There seemed to be a little bit of a buzz about us, but then it wasn't clear whether Big Cat were able to kind of put an album out. It all went a little bit like, if I look back at the time span of it now, I think, my God, we were so impatient. It's like, oh, nothing's happened. A month's gone by. We must,
Yes.
we must make other plans. So I think what happened then was it just went a bit uncertain, and so we were a bit like, okay, so this doesn't look like it's going to be right for us. Let's kind of like, I don't know, maybe we got a bit more confidence now, as I say, we'd had those good reviews, and then we thought, okay, what label? If we could choose a label, what label would it be? And we decided that One Little Indian, because of the bands they had on, the ethos they seemed to have, the record sleeves, the fact that, Derek was from old punk days type thing. There was something really kind of alluring, I think, about the whole thing of them.
Yes.
So we did a similar thing as that we did with like John Peel. We just kind of bombarded. We sent stuff. I remember we made a packet of digestive biscuits, and where you'd see the sort of the picture of the biscuit, we kind of did a hand painted sort of record, and it said Popinjays instead of digestives, and we just sent him stuff, and then rang him up a couple of times, and he spoke to us. He was always lovely, and he sort of said, look, I'll be honest with you, I'd love to make an album with you, but I've got to wait and see how the next Sugar Cubes EP does. If it does okay, then I'll sign you. If it doesn't, I don't know. So we were like, oh, okay, that made perfect sense to us. So we just waited. The EP came out, seemed to do well. Straight back on the phone to Derek, and he's going, okay, come in. And he had it for a meeting, and he said, yeah, all right, then we'll make an album. And I remember thinking, my God, an album, that's 10 songs. I'm not even sure we had 10 songs at the time. And Derek took a call or something while we were in the room, and I said to Polly, that's 10 songs, isn't it? And she went, yeah. And I went, at least 10 songs. Yeah. We don't have 10 songs. And she went, shh, don't tell him that.
Excellent.
So then he put us into the studio with this guy called Brian Pugsley, who was kind of, a programmer, doing all the kind of, we went to the Garden studio, which was the studio that belonged to Matt. Look at me, not remembering anything. The guy from the
Oh, Matt Johnson. Yes.
Yeah, so he'd bought a building in Shoreditch before Shoreditch was what it is now. It had been like an old department store, and in the ground, in the basement, he'd made a studio called The Garden, and we recorded our album there. We were given sort of like 2 weeks, and we were in day and night and just like knocked out, bang up to date.
Blimey, God, actually, Brian Pugsley has got a fantastic CV, hasn't he, of bands that he's recorded from yes, I was just looking at his kind of, yes, he was certainly the man of the moment. I guess during that late 80s though, Rough Trade had the Smiths and had gone a bit pear-shaped, and then Creation Records were around, but were there indie labels at that stage? I just wondered. There
were some for sure, yeah, but we'd met, and again, what was a good thing for us being at the Bull and Gate was we were able to, we'd met most people from labels. Yes. So various like Lazy Records and like say McGee, we'd met them because they'd either come down to see bands or they'd asked us to put their bands on or all of that. So Polly and I had a really good sense of people, and we didn't like anybody.
No.
A lot of these men. We didn't like them. We didn't like the vibe. Whereas with Derek and One Little Indian, it all just felt really good. And even when we went to see Derek and in the office, like we met his wife, and he had a little daughter. And because I'd been a nanny before, he asked me if I'd look after the child. And in fact, I almost was Bjork's child's nanny at one point, but I couldn't fit her in. Too busy being a rock star myself.
Yes. Oh God. Yes.
So yeah, we had met all of those people, but I found them a little bit, a bit, boys club, a bit creepy, maybe a bit full of themselves, all a bit kind of, do you want to be in our club? How bad do you want to be in our club? And it was like, no, we have our own club. It's fine.
Yes, we'll just One Little Indian at that stage. So then when the album came out, was this when you went on tour with the Kitchens of Distinction?
Yes. Yeah.
Because I went to see them when they were doing the tour. And did you come to the Norwich Arts Centre? Would you have been supporting them on that tour?
No, I don't think we played the Norwich Arts Centre. The only time I played in Norwich was actually more recently in like 2017 when we did some heritage gigs. There was a big heritage festival thing there or something, heritage indie gigs.
Oh,
no,
right.
I don't remember playing Norwich. No.
No, because then I remember seeing that particular gig and also the Heartthrobs as well,
Oh
which
yes,
were both
so
on.
another one little Indian band that we went on
Yeah.
tour with, which was probably not as much fun in some respects. We were yeah, we a few tours we went on tour with them. We went on tour with Cud, I think. Can't remember. Did some gigs with They Might Be Giants. Yeah, did.
Did you go to Europe or America at all?
We went to America. Yeah.
And what was that like?
Yeah, it was interesting. Yeah, so that was off the back of because so we did sort of Bang Up to Date first album and a couple of singles from that, and then we did. We were planning on a second album, and then we did Vote Elvis as an EP between one album and the other.
Yes.
And Vote Elvis was always meant to be a B-side, and then it just sounded so good, and we'd done the second album with Ian Brody. And then Jessica Corcoran, we really liked her. We kind of wanted a female in the mix as well, and she did the mixing on Vote Elvis. And then when we listened to the tracks ready for the release, we thought we can't have it as B-side, it's the A-side or double B-side, Too Young and Vote Elvis. And then Vote Elvis did really, really well in America in the college charts. And we'd signed at that point to a label in America called Big Pop. And they were in Philadelphia, and they were part of like kind of a subsidiary of a much bigger record label that had been the Philly Sound, all of the kind of, Motown stuff, but they had this imprint called Big Pop. And the guy that ran that just absolutely loved Popinjays and really, really pushed us. I remember Polly and I writing something like 60 postcards to different radio stations across the States from England with Union Jack on the front. Hello from the Popinjays in London. Please play our record. And it worked. We did really, really well in America. So we went over there. Went over there a couple of times, but we never actually played gigs. We did a lot of those kind of like in-store promotion things or live on a radio station or in thingy signings. We never actually played gigs, but I think I have to blame myself for the not playing any gigs because I went over there once to do promo, and it just happened to be my birthday while I was there. And the record company said, "Oh, let's go out for dinner." And I just thought it was just going to be a few people, but they decided to make it a kind of meet and greet thing. And so I turned up, and there were all these people, and there was a big birthday cake, and I just drank too much tequila because I felt a little bit uncomfortable being the center of attention, and then was so hungover the next day when I was meant to go and meet the agent who was going to then promote our tour in America, and I forgot to go.
Oh no.
I mean, I got off the plane back to England, and I got home. Polly said, "There's a guy been ringing saying you didn't go and meet him." I was like, "Oh God, I forgot. I genuinely forgot." So who knows? Who knows what could have happened? But I do seem to recall they were trying to put us on tour with like the Indigo Girls, and which didn't seem to fit with us at all. And then the Proclaimers, and we were quite snobbish, I think, in those days. We were a bit like, "Oh no, that's not our kind of music. Oh no, that's not our kind of band." So we were probably a little bit hard to place, really. But no, we did well there.
Yes.
Yeah.
So Vote Elvis was big on college radio, which isn't surprising.
And then that led to us being signed to Sony Music for the world because of how well that had done. But they didn't. We just they didn't really have any interest in kind of developing us. I think that's one of the reasons we decided to give it a, take a break from it all, which is we meant to only take a break, not completely end, because we'd gone over to America, we'd met with Sony, we'd had all these conversations, and they'd said, "Oh, we love this song, we want more of that, and we don't like, this is not right." And being a bit kind of like, you need to look more this, you need to look more. It was such a far cry from the Bullinger and One Little Indian and our punk roots and feminism and everything we wanted to do. And we remember, both of us still say now we left there and we were kind of like wondering why we felt so miserable, and it just felt wrong. It just didn't feel like it was, we're being packaged as a product, which of course music industry is an industry, right?
Yes.
But when we got back from there, we kind of thought, not sure. And then we went on to make the third album, which we absolutely loved.
So Flying Down to Mono Valley, that was your second. So was that before Vote Elvis or after?
It was the same. So I think Vote Elvis was an EP off that.
Right.
Yeah, so we
And
went
then,
with Sony and
did you start doing festivals as well? Because the Glastonbury, Reading.
yeah, we
Did you
never
do
played Glastonbury, but we did Reading. We did a few kind of small festivals, but definitely we played Reading. Yeah.
And that period, obviously, you'd ensconced in goth and indie pop in a way, and new romantic and the specials. But then the 90s, things start to change quite drastically, don't they? We've got this sort of suddenly 4AD bring out the Pixies and the
Yeah.
and the Throne Muses, and then obviously Bleach comes along, and then never mind. And then grunge starts to appear, and then there's Britpop a bit later. What was it like for you, sort of as an artist, thinking, wow, this is all a bit of a different scene at the moment?
Yeah, I guess we were kind of more in the kind of indie pop thing there. So when grunge came, I mean, it was music I personally enjoyed, but it wasn't music that we could make or wanted to make. So again, it fit us, especially, I suppose, there were some female artists, weren't there then, but it's still, again, it felt a bit like it's a boys' club, and that's kind of boys' music, I don't know. But yeah, we just carried on ploughing our own furrow, I think, really.
Yeah, it was just a few of those bands like the Darling Buds and the Primitives, and I don't know, bands like the Mighty Lemon Drops. They were all starting to sort of feel the fatigue of it all, weren't they? They were starting to drop off one by one.
Yeah,
I know they'd gone through the trenches of indie pop, and they couldn't do the indie circuit anymore. So did you, when you were coming to do your third album, what was the atmosphere like with the band at that stage?
I mean, Polly and I had been kind of in and out, when you're spending all the time with somebody, living with them, recording, traveling, all of that kind of thing. We'd gone in and out of kind of, love and hate, and, me hating who she was seeing and she'd hate who I was seeing. And then we'd go, I don't know, we'd go in and out of stuff, but it was always a bit like family, really. And then we had Ben and Sam join, and they'd been in a band called Airhead. And when they joined, it seemed to kind of stabilize things quite a bit, really. They toured the second album with us, and then were with us while we wrote the third album. And I think we'd got a bit sick of the kind of indie, people always were like jangly indie girl band thing, and we'd got into more kind of, I don't know what sort of music really, but maybe let me think. I used to really love Mary Margaret O'Hara.
Oh my God, Miss America.
Yeah, one of my favourite albums of all time. Absolutely glorious, isn't it?
I know. The second album never appeared.
No. And then Polly was always a massive fan of Micro Disney and Fatima Mansions. Oh, we'd been on tour with Fatima Mansions, actually. Anyway, we just decided we'd just write whatever we wanted to write that was a little bit less kind of poppy, indie, jangly stuff. And then we wrote Tales of the Urban Prairie, which we were really happy with, but it didn't really fit. It didn't fit neatly with the music we'd made before. And, the reviews of it were, well, this is good, but it's not the Popinjays kind of thing. And I think all of those combined, we just sort of felt, why don't we just give it a break? And then we'll come, when people have forgotten who the Popinjays were, we can come back and do what we want to do now, but we'll be doing something else or whatever. So yeah, we
Did you tour that album at all?
No, Polly and I still incredibly close. I'd stay over at her house once a week almost, and we still sort of laugh about it, because I remember her saying, no, we're going to be really moody. We're going to be really moody with this one. We're not going to go on tour. We're not going to do all that. We're just going to be really we're going to do a little bit of that. We maybe do a Mark Radcliffe session, and we're not going to release a single, and we're not going to go on tour. And it's like, what are people going to do then? We did one gig, I think, in London, and we didn't go on tour, and we didn't release a single, and yeah, it was all a bit useless, really.
Oh, that's such a shame, because it's, it does sound fantastic to this day. I mean, did you sort of, a couple of years later, did you suddenly, when you started seeing Britpop and, I don't know, bands like Echo Belly and Elastica and then Sleeper, did you think, we should be kind of in there a little bit, nestling away?
I think that was probably another reason why we gave it up as well. We felt a little bit like we were never really championed by anybody or any particular, we didn't fit neatly into any sort of genre. And because we didn't have a manager for quite a long time, because we didn't feel we needed one, we were quite capable, but the industry didn't like it if you didn't have a manager. So we ended up having like 2 or 3 guys that were just used, they were just rubbish. And, anyway, so we did really play the game particularly. And then it felt a bit like it wasn't as enjoyable as it had been. And I guess if somebody had said, you're the best thing since whatever, and really got behind us and, promoted an album or something, it might have been a different story. But we kind of felt like, we'd had enough of it all by then.
Right. Were you still doing the Bull and Gate at this stage? Were you still
given up the Bull and Gate? We'd just about given up the Bull and Gate when we were making the third album. So yeah.
There you go. So then what happens for you in 93? What's the... Did you all sit down and have a bit of a, to quote Jim Morrison, this is the end, or not the end, but shall we just give it a break?
Well, last album was released in 94.
Oh, yes.
And that's when we just sort of had this thing of like, nobody's really getting behind it. This is what we want to do. One Little Indian we felt like they weren't really helping us, promoting us, doing all that kind of thing, because we didn't fit in the, kind of niche as we had earlier. So we just kind of had a meeting with Derek. We said, we don't want to do this anymore. Let us out of the contract. I think we had something where we asked if we could have the tapes of everything. We were a bit like, give us our tapes, they're ours. Some nonsense like that. And then Polly and I just kind of said, well, let's just give it a break for a bit. And she was by then had begun DJing as part of the Mean Fiddler, kind of doing some gigs as a DJ with a friend, with Liz Naylor, who had been our press person at One Little Indian.
Yes,
Liz and Riot Girl and all of that. So Polly was with her and doing all of those things. While I'd been at when I'd been in the band, I'd volunteered at Childline, and I just kind of decided to put my attention to developing my sort of therapy skills, just taking a break, and then the break just went on, and we never. We also, another thing that kind of was a nail in the coffin was at the end of our last tour, or maybe even after that one gig that we did for the third album, our tour manager had a lockup where he kept all of our gear, and it was stolen. Everything was stolen. So Polly had a couple of guitars at home, and we had maybe a DAT player, but we nothing. So it was a bit of a we feel like giving up, and then that happened, and it was a bit like, do you know what? Let's just let it go now.
Oh God, that is harsh, isn't it?
Yeah, but we were both interested in other things, and it didn't feel like a sort of a. Yeah, it felt like almost like a relationship coming to an end. Like you'd had this amazing experience, or you just kind of grown out of it, maybe a little bit.
Yes,
wanted to do other things.
I think that's, I mean, God, you're still so young at that stage as well.
Yeah, we were still so young, 30 or 32 or something like that. Yeah.
Yes, and yes, I know, when we were growing up, and you think, God, Paul McCartney is in his 30s, that's ancient. Mick Jagger, it's like...
It is now.
I know, God, what I thought that was, thinking these are old, but, Debbie Harry was in her 30s when we saw her on Top of the Pops. Wow. Actually, she just... didn't look 30 at all, did she, really, when she sung Didn't
Still doesn't look 70 or whatever she is. I think she's... So
you focused on Childline. Mm-hmm. Did music come onto your radar at all?
No. I took a real... And again, it felt a bit like... It felt like a relationship had ended, and then you don't talk to that person anymore. It felt a bit like that for me. I kind of turned away from sort of music. I think because there was a bit, it felt like a broken, like a divorce, if you like. That, so I didn't really get into music that much for quite some time, and then gradually got back into listening to it, enjoying it in that way, but not in any sense of thinking, oh, I want to be in a band. I think I kind of maybe. No, I don't think I did any kind of singing. Just totally gave that up entirely.
Yes. Well, you must admit, a few people I spoke to have just, I don't know, they weren't traumatised by their musical experience, but it did leave them, feeling like they'd been in a tough football game with quite a few bruises and a bit of...
Yeah, there was some of that, but I think I'd always got a sense, and again, whether it's my kind of working class kind of pride or something, I never wanted to be someone who was oh, that's so-and-so, she used to be in a band. I didn't
Yes.
want, I wanted that to be a really solid part of my life, and then to decide to do something else and be very good at that. I didn't want it to be sort of like, I think when we ran the Bull and Gate, you'd see people that had been in bands for years and they just kept kind of playing the same gigs, or they'd slightly change the lineup and change the name, but they'd just carry on, and they were getting old, 30. I didn't want any of that for myself. So I felt like, okay, this has gone as far as it can. Let's like leave, quit while we're ahead. And at that point we kind of, had some bruises and just felt a bit disillusioned with the whole process. So stepped away, and then didn't really think about it again until we were approached in 2015, 2014, asked if we'd like do some reunion gigs with other Hindi bands.
Yes. And did that take much persuading when you were given that sort of option?
It didn't for me, because I just had a big birthday, and my life was kind of, I just felt like I was in a mind space of kind of what's life got to offer. I want to be involved in whatever. I kind of gave myself this year where the more ridiculous the request, the more likely I would be to say yes. So I live in Whitstable on the coast, which is famous for oysters, and they have an oyster eating competition every year. And I was asked that summer to be the compere, and I was like, why would they ask me? But I think I'd formed a bit of a female a cappella band with some friends.
Right.
We were called Nirvana Rama.
Classic.
We took all sorts of like Smith songs or Nirvana songs or whatever, and we changed them into like 3-part harmonies, but made all the words rude, but made the harmonies perfect and all of that. So yeah, I had started to sing a little bit again, and then so when they asked me, I was kind of like, oh yeah, the guy that was setting up these indie festivals, he had tried to find us and he couldn't. And then for some reason he came across something on the Bull and Gate, or I must have commented or something like that. And then he got in touch, and he only lived up the road in Faversham. And also by then I again, in this year of doing ridiculous things, I'd started to sing in a rockabilly band called Cherry Bomb and the Rockets. I mean, I wasn't into rockabilly music at all, but I just felt like singing used to be a good thing. I should do it again. Anyway, so he asked if we would play these gigs. So it was to play with the Darling Buds at the Lexington, and then to play at the Forum with the Wonder Stuff and the Wedding Present and Primitives and all of these. Had these 2 gigs in mind. And I was like totally up for it. And I let Polly know. I said, look, we should do it. And she just said, no, not interested. Don't have the tapes, don't know how we would do it. I've still got a guitar, but I don't think I can do it. And I felt really disappointed. And I was telling the band that I was in about this offer, and they said, well, we'll be your backing band. We can learn the songs if you want to do it. So I checked with the promoter and I said, if only I do it, can it still be? And he went, yeah, absolutely. It doesn't have to be both of you, So then I went to say to Polly, look, I've decided I'm going to do it. I'd rather do it with you, but you don't want to do it, but I'm going to do it, and all of that. And then she changed her mind.
Oh my God, that's such a great story. Yes. Yes.
Thank goodness she did change her mind, because I don't think it would have been half as much fun with the guys I was in the rockabilly band with. And, in the end, we just had the biggest, sort of most fun together. All the misery that we'd kind of had at the end of the Popinjays forgotten. We did these gigs, met up with people that, because back then people can hardly imagine this now, but there was no internet, there was no Instagram, there was no Facebook, there was nothing. If people were fans of your band, they either came to you to see your band, or they wrote you fan letters. We got to go to those gigs, and people come and tell us, I met my husband at one of your gigs, or I listened to your album when I was giving birth. There was so many kind of wonderful, that now if you're in a band, I think you'd know about those things while they were happening, whereas then you didn't really. And we just got to meet gorgeous people and have fun. And actually, one of the best things about it was being able to really notice and fully acknowledge that we were actually quite good. That's the right.
Yes.
We actually wrote some really good songs, and we were good live, and we were quite uplifting, and people enjoyed us, and we enjoyed it. We kind of, we enjoyed it probably as much as we'd hoped we could have the first time.
Yeah. And what was it like when you got back in the same room with Polly and then the band? Was that quite a sort of interesting, because it
Yeah.
had been over 2 decades probably since you'd been in the same space.
That's
Did
right.
that?
It was only Polly and I, because always anybody else that we brought into the band were like hired hands. It was only ever Polly and I that were songwriters,
Yes.
and we'd stayed friends all the way through. So, and we would almost instantly, the minute we had our first rehearsal, playing the tapes, playing the songs, singing. Excuse me. We got an immediate we were just laughing. We were just laughing our heads off. We were just loving it. We were just remembering things from, oh, do you remember when we played that gig? Do you remember when we so and so? All these kind of memories came, and we just, yeah, it was an absolute joy from start to finish. There was not a minute of any of those gigs, and I think we played the last one in 2023. Every one of them has been an absolute joy.
Oh, that's nice, because I mean, with a few people who've had this experience, it felt for them quite a healing process. It felt like there had been this thing that was slightly niggling, in their lives that, they had to repress or forget. And, they hadn't slightly, I don't know, hadn't made peace with it, I suppose. There was that sense there were still things that were just a little bit there. But, sometimes denial is a great thing, or just ignoring it. But then having that time to be able to come back and then, just say a few words, but not have to go into great detail, but just to then realize that, a lot of things can happen in life, as one knows as you get older, and you just think, let's put it into some sort of perspective and realize actually we're just two human beings on a planet making some music. We did we did some ridiculous things, and mostly people can own, yes, before you say anything, I'm sorry that I said such and such, because I realized that wasn't a great thing either. And then everyone feels a bit like, oh, okay, that's fine, and let's move on then. And that's great. It's really nice.
It was. I think it was very healing, and also just rejuvenating as well. I think, and it gave us that gift of enjoying it. And you weren't worried about whether someone was writing about you or how many people came to your gig or whatever. When we did first gig at the Lexington, I was sure there would be, when we went to come on, there'd be nobody there, and I was like walked out, and I was like, oh my goodness, and to still see some of the same faces on the front that we'd seen like 30 years ago or whatever. It was healing. We really enjoyed it, and I think the best thing for me was being able to take it away from we did know what we were doing, and we were good at it, and it was just a wonderful thing to do in your 20s, and again in your 50s.
Yes. So when you did that in 2015. Was it the case then that you've occasionally, up to 2 years ago, just played sporadically when it sort of the mood takes you?
Yeah. So our thing is kind of, if it sounds interesting, if the band we might be playing with we like the sound of, or we never played with, or we did play with and we want to play with again, or an interesting, like we went and did an indie festival out in Cologne, and we just, if it seems interesting, we'll do it.
Yes. So there you go.
Yeah, but I don't know that we were asked to do something a little while ago, and neither of us felt the urge, really felt like we've done that. But never say never.
No, well, it's nice in a way, and it stops having that certain pressure to say yes or no, and then have to change your mind. You think, oh, that's quite a lot of emotional baggage, manoeuvring sometimes. But that's brilliant. Did you ever sort of make any new music, either with yourself or any of your other musical bands?
No, so I did make a record in 2017 with someone who had been a Popinjays fan in America, had travelled over to see the gig when we played with the Wonder Stuff, met then, really got on, and he was in a band in San Francisco. There was a shoegazy band, and I think it reawoken the part of me that was like always wanted to be the Cocteau Twins, and kind of we made this one single which I think it got reviewed, and somebody said something, I can't remember exactly now, but it said something like, Wendy's vocals always on the brink of breaking, and there was something, and it was like, oh, that's it. Nobody ever described my vocals as kind of like fragile or any of those kind of things, and I think I'd always wanted that. I didn't want to be a shouty pop person. I think somewhere deep inside me I wanted to be this kind of misunderstood, sort of deeply emotional goth.
So was this kind of more dream pop?
Yes, it was dream pop for
It was
certain. Yeah,
dream pop.
absolutely.
So this was Moth to a Flame.
That's right. Yeah, yeah. So just the one single, did a handful of gigs. Very difficult to be in a band when one of you is in San Francisco and the other one's in England. So but I feel that was a real treat for me because I got to make a record that was nothing like the Popinjays, but was a kind of tiny little part of me that always wanted to see if I could make music like that. So that was really lovely as well. But I think the nice thing about getting older as well is that I was satisfied with that. We made one record. If it had become an album or whatever, we probably wrote about half a dozen songs together. But I was happy with it. I didn't feel like, oh, I need to get back in the music industry. Or I had a little bit of a dalliance with it, thinking, oh, should we try and get it played on Radio 6? And we met up with Steve Lamacq because Polly and I were thinking of putting a book together about Popinjays, and he was going to do the introduction. But it all kind of like ended up being like, no, we don't really need to do any of that.
Right. Yes, the great archiving. Well, we, as a fan, the archiving is fun to see because there's been so many publications, books, and even films made about bands, and I mean, it must take a lot of work, but it is beautiful to see, and it does. I mean, because there's a sort of art to it as well. The posters, the design, everything about it, I think is just great. There's so many books that have come out recently. I mean, it does cost a fortune to buy them, but it's still worth it. But then,
we were looking into that at one point with One Little Indian, and we started. Polly's the archivist. She got all of the stuff out. We were starting to look at it, but then it got a little bit, too many of those conversations about how many units you'd have to sell. But then we also, in that process, uncovered some demos and some songs that we'd totally forgotten we'd written, and so we put out a little EP. We put out a what did we call it? Demos and Rarities, which you can get on Bandcamp, which has got some great tracks, things that I've never remember recording at all, or like a track from the third album, which is called Kentish Town, and we discovered another version which is exactly the same backing but a totally different lyric and a totally different vocal. And when I listen to it, I think, oh gosh, that's so much better. We should have gone with that one, but I don't even remember writing it or recording it. So that was nice because then we got to give that away when we played a few of the gigs, and real fans got hold of it. So that was nice.
Yes, it must be nice to see, various, when you played those dates, certain people who must have seen you at the time, but also probably people who were interested to discover you and see what it was all about sort of decades later, who probably weren't even born, actually. It must have been...
No, well, in the very last gig we did, my son, who was maybe 20 at the time, he'd recently moved to, no, he was about 19, he'd gone to London to university, and he'd known I'd been in a band back when, but had never taken any notice really of the more recent gigs. Anyway, I'd said to him, I'm playing a gig in London on Saturday night, do you want to come along? And by that age, he was interested, and he came along, and it was great because he was like, I couldn't believe it, Mum. All those people had like Popinjays t-shirts on, and and at the end, what he said to me, he was like, "You still got it, babe."
God, that must have
that was nice.
That must have made it all worthwhile.
Oh,
that must
lovely.
be. Well, that's lovely. And so anyway, you've got no sort of musical projects on the horizon at the moment. Just wait and see. But people can follow your Facebook page.
Yeah, we've got Popinjays Facebook page. Can get in touch that way. If anybody's got anything interesting they can imagine inviting us to do, then we're always consider anything. But Polly still does promotion in a venue in London. And her partner is kind of a jazz musician. She's kind of more in that sort of world now. And then I work for a national charity and probably going to be writing a book more related to that than Popinjays, I should think. But the charity I work with has got lots of ambassadors. We try and promote our work through mental health. So New Order are our ambassadors, and we do a lot of music. So I think at the end of it all, music was always for me about communication, about helping people feel that they could relate, they could see themselves, or they could feel like they belonged, or all of those kind of things. And I think music still means that to me. I'm just not the one making it anymore, but I'm certainly kind of still behind that sort of power of what it can mean in people's lives.
Yes, I think that's often think if I could say something to my 16-year-old self, it was go to even more gigs. At the time, I
Yes,
thought I went, but now I think, oh, all those bands I wished I'd, because they, when you look at those bills, it was like 2 or 3 really good bands for 250 or something.
I know.
And you went, oh no, I should have gone to that gig. I shouldn't have been so on the fence, thinking, I'm not sure, I'm not that keen. It was just go. I should have just gone. I mean, if you could have whispered something to your 16-year-old self, I'm always curious. Is there anything in particular that you would have just said to them, even if that
Yeah.
person might have ignored you? Probably would, but
I think it would be more around reassurance. I think it would have been around kind of, it's all going to be great. Just relax, just be you, do the things that you love, and it's all going to be okay. Because it always has been okay. And the only things that kind of got in the way of enjoying some of the Popinjays that when we went and did it more recently, we could see differently was that sort of self-doubt or that kind of like feeling we weren't good enough or comparison or all of that, or wondering, oh, what's the next step? What should we do or not do? And, all of that. So I think I'd just tell myself, relax, it's going to be great.
yes, well, that's always good advice, actually. Well, look, Wendy, thank you ever so much for giving me your time for
Oh,
this. This has been
lovely.
brilliant to have caught up. And
Thank you.
yes, I feel much more like this has been, yes, really nice to hear your story. And I'm so pleased that, yes, you've got some great work you're doing now, actually. It sounds very rewarding as we truck through our 60s.
Yes, it's rewarding, and I can spend most of my time sitting down doing it as well. So
Yes, it's
I
quite
didn't have
nice.
to jump up and down on stages
So
anymore.
what's the charity you work for?
So I work for a charity called Campaign Against Living Miserably, which is also Calm. But yeah, we're a suicide prevention charity. But we do, yeah, we're very much kind of like trying to change culture to change that. Not in a kind of, we're not like Mind or Samaritans or anything like that. I mean, people want to check us out. It's thecalmzone.net. And as I say, we've got lots of fabulous ambassadors that are in the music. We kind of try and position ourselves in sport, in music, and in kind of people's real lives, really, as a way of our mission is to help people end their misery, not their lives. So yeah, it fits right on my street. The guy that our CEO used to be a manager of bands and was in the record business. Our director of partnerships also was in bands. There's a lot of us in the charity who've come through that sort of world. So I feel right at home there.
Yeah, well, God, I'm going to check this out. That
Yeah,
sounds
please do.
fascinating. And in fact, I have, and I'll put the link of the charity in the notes below. And that, dear listener, is the end of the interview. A massive thank you to Wendy for giving me the time for that. As I said, still a member of the Popinjays. Do check out their back catalogue. It's fantastic. Hopefully they'll be playing again live one day. This has been the C86 show. If you want to contact me, you can on any of those exciting social media platform sites. They're fascinating, I know. Just do C86 show with my name, David Eastaugh, and send me a message. Obviously, yes, just make it groovy and positive. Otherwise, why did you bother? Anyway, have a great week. Stay safe.